The Arizona Territory dust swirled in lazy spirals across the barren landscape as Jack Sullivan guided his weathered horse through the rocky terrain. The sun hung mercilessly overhead, a blazing white disk that seemed to drain the life from everything below. His ranch lay another hour's ride ahead. A modest spread nestled between two mesas that had been his home for the past 7 years. Jack was a man shaped by the frontier, tall and lean, with hands calloused from years of working cattle and mending fences. His face bore the permanent squint lines of someone who spent their days scanning horizons. And his brown hair had been bleached lighter by countless hours under the relentless desert sun. At 34, he had learned to read the land like other men read newspapers, understanding its moods and dangers with an intimacy born of necessity. The silence of the desert was broken only by the rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. This was country that demanded respect, where a moment's inattention could mean the difference between life and death, where water was more precious than gold, and where a man's word was often the only law that mattered. As he crested a small rise, Jack's trained eye caught something unusual in the distance. Near a cluster of sagebrush and weathered rocks, a small figure lay motionless. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle secured to his saddle as he approached cautiously. Years of living on the edge of Apache territory had taught him that anything unexpected could be dangerous. Drawing closer, Jack's expression softened as he realized what he was seeing. A child, no more than 8 or 9 years old, lay unconscious in the sparse shade of a mesquite bush. The boy's dark skin and traditional Apache clothing immediately identified his heritage, but Jack's concern overrode any tribal considerations. This was a human being in distress, and out here that was all that mattered. Dismounting quickly, Jack knelt beside the child and checked for signs of life. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady, his skin hot and dry from dehydration. His lips were cracked and his small body showed clear signs of exhaustion. Jack's experienced eye told him the child had been traveling for some time without adequate water or food. "Easy there, son," Jack murmured softly, though he wasn't sure if the boy could hear him. He reached for his canteen, precious water that he rationed carefully during these long rides. Without hesitation, he wet a cloth and gently moistened the child's lips, allowing small drops to seep into his mouth. The boy stirred slightly at the touch of water, his eyelids fluttering. When he opened his eyes, Jack saw intelligence there, along with fear and confusion. The child tried to sit up quickly, but Jack placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Whoa there, take it easy," Jack said in a calm voice. "You're safe now." He held up the canteen, miming drinking. "Water. You need water." The Apache boy regarded Jack with wary eyes, clearly torn between his desperate thirst and his instinctive distrust of the white cowboy. Years of conflict between their peoples had taught even the youngest Apache children to be cautious around strangers, especially those with pale skin. Jack understood the child's hesitation. Relations between settlers and the Apache had been strained for decades, marked by misunderstandings, broken treaties, and violence on both sides. But this was a child, alone and dying of thirst in the desert. Politics and tribal allegiances seemed insignificant in the face of such basic human need. "It's all right," Jack said again, his voice steady and reassuring. He took a small sip from the canteen himself, then offered it to the boy. "Clean water. Good water." The child's thirst finally overcame his caution. He reached for the canteen with trembling hands and drank deeply, the cool water bringing immediate relief to his parched throat. Jack watched carefully, occasionally pulling the canteen away to prevent the boy from drinking too quickly and making himself sick. "Easy, easy," Jack cautioned. "Not too fast. Your body needs time to accept it." When the child had drunk enough, Jack reached into his saddlebags and pulled out some jerky and hardtack biscuits. The food was simple but nourishing, exactly what the boy needed. He offered the jerky first, breaking it into small pieces that would be easy to chew and digest. "Beba agua e coma pouco," Jack said in his limited Portuguese, then corrected himself with the few Spanish words he knew. "Drink water and eat something," he repeated in English, hoping the boy might understand some of the words. The Apache child looked up at Jack with large dark eyes that seemed too old for his young face. There was gratitude there, but also wariness. He accepted the food gratefully, eating slowly as Jack had shown him to drink. As the boy ate, Jack studied his surroundings more carefully. There were no signs of other travelers, no tracks that might indicate where the child had come from or where he might have been going. The nearest Apache settlement was at least 2 days' hard ride to the north, far too distant for a child to have traveled alone. "What's your name, son?" Jack asked gently, though he didn't expect an answer. The language barrier was significant, and even if they could communicate, the boy might not trust him enough to share personal information. The child finished eating and drinking, then looked directly at Jack. In halting English, he said, "Ayana." He pointed to himself. He pointed. "Ayana?" Jack nodded, filing the name away. "Ayana?" he repeated, trying to pronounce it correctly. "I'm Jack." He pointed to himself. "Jack." Ayana studied Jack's face intently, as if trying to read his intentions. The cowboy's weathered features showed kindness and concern, and his actions had already demonstrated his willingness to help rather than harm. Slowly, some of the tension left the boy's small frame. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack knew he needed to make a decision. He couldn't leave the child here alone, but taking him presented its own complications. Apache families would be searching for their missing son, and finding him in the company of a white rancher could easily be misinterpreted. Still, there was really no choice. The boy needed shelter, food, and medical attention that only Jack could provide at the moment. Whatever consequences might arise later, the immediate priority was keeping Ayana alive and safe. "Come on, son," Jack said, standing and extending his hand to the boy. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Ayana hesitated for a moment, then took Jack's hand and allowed himself to be helped to his feet. He was unsteady after his ordeal, but determined to stand on his own. Jack admired the boy's spirit. Even in his weakened condition, there was a fierce independence in his bearing that spoke to his Apache heritage. Jack helped Ayana mount his horse, settling him securely in front of the saddle. The boy's small body felt fragile against Jack's chest as they began the ride toward the ranch. The horse, a sturdy bay mare named Clara, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation and maintained a smooth, steady pace that wouldn't jar her injured passenger. As they rode through the gathering dusk, Jack found his mind racing with questions and concerns. How had Ayana come to be alone in the desert? Was he lost, or had something more sinister separated him from his family? And what would happen when the Apache discovered where their missing child had gone? The landscape around them gradually shifted from open desert to the more verdant area around Jack's ranch. The property sat in a natural basin where an underground spring provided year-round water, creating a small oasis of green in the otherwise harsh environment. It was this water source that had drawn Jack to settle here, and it was what made his modest ranching operation possible. As they approached the ranch buildings, Jack felt a mix of relief and apprehension. His home consisted of a simple but sturdy adobe house, a barn and several corrals where he kept his small herd of cattle and horses. It was a peaceful place, isolated enough to provide privacy, but close enough to the nearest town for necessary supplies and occasional company. Jack's dog, a loyal border collie named Scout, came running to greet them as they entered the ranch yard. The dog's enthusiastic barking caused Ayana to tense, but Jack's calm voice reassured both the boy and the animal. "Easy, Scout," Jack called. "We've got a visitor." Scout immediately sensed that something was different about this arrival. The intelligent dog circled them cautiously, his protective instincts balanced by his trust in his master's judgment. After a few moments, Scout seemed to accept Ayana's presence and settled into a watchful but non-threatening position nearby. Jack helped Ayana down from the horse and led him toward the house. The boy's legs were still shaky from his ordeal, but he walked with dignity, his dark eyes taking in every detail of his surroundings. Jack could see him assessing potential escape routes and hiding places, survival instincts that had probably kept him alive during his time alone in the desert. The interior of Jack's home was simple but comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace providing warmth and a place to cook. A few pieces of handmade furniture, some books, and personal belongings gave the space a lived-in feel that spoke of solitary but content existence. Jack guided Ayanna to a chair near the table and immediately set about preparing a more substantial meal. The boy needed proper nutrition to fully recover from his ordeal. Jack's ranch life had taught him to cook simple but nourishing food. He prepared a soup using vegetables from his small garden, along with some of the beef from his own cattle. As the food cooked, Jack tended to Ayanna's immediate needs. He heated water and gently cleaned the cuts and scrapes the boy had sustained during his desert wanderings. Ayanna bore this attention stoically, wincing only slightly when Jack cleaned the deeper wounds. His resilience impressed the cowboy. This child had endured hardships that would have broken many adults. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" Jack murmured as he bandaged a particularly nasty scrape on Ayanna's arm. The boy didn't understand the words, but he seemed to grasp their meaning, sitting a little straighter with quiet pride. When the meal was ready, Jack served it in a simple wooden bowl, testing the temperature carefully before offering it to his young guest. Ayanna ate hungrily but with good manners, clearly having been raised with proper social customs, despite his current circumstances. As they ate together in companionable silence, Jack tried to piece together what might have happened to bring this Apache child to his doorstep. The most likely explanation was that Ayanna had become separated from a traveling party, perhaps during a storm or some other emergency. Apache families were skilled desert travelers, but accidents could happen to anyone in this unforgiving environment. The evening passed quietly, with Jack doing his best to make Ayanna comfortable despite the language barrier. He showed the boy where he could sleep, a small alcove off the main room that provided privacy and security. Jack set up a bedroll there and made sure Ayanna had easy access to water and food if he needed it during the night. As darkness settled over the ranch, Jack found himself listening more intently than usual to the sounds of the desert night. Somewhere out there, Apache families were probably searching for their missing child. Following tracks and asking questions at every settlement and water source, it was only a matter of time before those searches led them to his ranch. Before settling in for the night, Jack checked and double-checked his rifle and pistol, making sure they were clean and loaded. He wasn't expecting trouble, but years of frontier life had taught him to be prepared for anything. The situation was delicate. He had an Apache child under his protection, and when the boy's people came looking for him, Jack's intentions might easily be misunderstood. Ayanna seemed to sleep peacefully despite his ordeal and unfamiliar surroundings. Jack, however, found rest elusive. He dozed fitfully, waking frequently to check on his young guest and listen for any unusual sounds outside. The responsibility he had accepted by bringing the boy home weighed heavily on his mind. Dawn came early to the Arizona Territory, announced by the calls of mourning doves and the gradual lightening of the eastern sky. Jack rose with the sun, as was his habit, and began his morning routine of tending to his animals. Ayanna woke shortly after, moving quietly around the house as he oriented himself to his surroundings. Jack prepared a hearty breakfast, knowing that good food would help restore Ayanna's strength. The boy ate gratefully, and Jack was pleased to see that his color was better and his movements more steady than they had been the night before. The rest and nourishment were clearly having their intended effect. After breakfast, Jack showed Ayanna around the ranch, partly to give the boy something to occupy his mind, and partly to demonstrate that he was free to move about as he pleased. This wasn't a captivity situation. Jack wanted that to be clear to both Ayanna and anyone who might be watching from the surrounding hills. The boy showed particular interest in Jack's horses, approaching them with the easy confidence of someone raised around animals. Jack was impressed by Ayanna's natural horsemanship, even weakened by his ordeal. The child moved around the horses with an intuitive understanding of their moods and behaviors. "You know horses," Jack observed, though he knew Ayanna couldn't understand all the words. The boy seemed to grasp his meaning and nodded, then demonstrated his skill by approaching Jack's most spirited horse, a young stallion that usually shied away from strangers. Under Ayanna's gentle touch, the horse calmed immediately, responding to some subtle communication that Jack could observe but not fully understand. It was a reminder that different cultures developed different skills and knowledge, and that the Apache people's understanding of the desert and its creatures was far deeper than his own. As the morning progressed, Jack found himself growing increasingly fond of his young guest. Despite their inability to communicate in words, Ayana was intelligent, respectful, and surprisingly helpful around the ranch. He seemed to understand what needed to be done, and quietly assisted with small tasks that his size and strength allowed. The peaceful morning routine was interrupted by Scout's sudden alertness. The dog's ears perked up, and he began a low, warning growl that indicated the approach of strangers. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his rifle as he scanned the horizon, looking for whatever had caught Scout's attention. At first, Jack saw nothing unusual in the landscape around his ranch. Then, like figures materializing from the desert itself, he began to notice movement along the ridgelines that surrounded his property. Dark shapes resolved themselves into mounted warriors, their horses moving with the fluid grace that marked Apache horsemanship. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he realized the full scope of what he was seeing. This wasn't a small search party looking for a lost child. This was a major gathering of Apache warriors, more than he had ever seen assembled in one place. As he watched in growing amazement and concern, more riders appeared along different ridges, their numbers swelling with each passing moment. Ayana had noticed the warriors too, and his reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of relief or joy at seeing his people, the boy's face showed fear and something that looked almost like shame. He moved closer to Jack as if seeking protection rather than preparing to rejoin his tribe. Jack counted the visible warriors carefully, his experienced eye estimating their numbers and positions. What he saw made his blood run cold. There were at least 300 Apache warriors arranged in a rough semicircle around his ranch, positioned on every high point that commanded a view of his property. They sat their horses with the motionless patience of natural hunters, neither advancing nor retreating, simply watching and waiting. The message was clear without any words being spoken. The Apache had come for their child, and they had brought enough warriors to overwhelm any resistance Jack might offer. But their positioning also suggested a willingness to negotiate. If they had intended immediate violence, they would have attacked at dawn when surprise would have been on their side. Jack's mind raced as he tried to understand the situation. Clearly, Ayana was no ordinary Apache child. The massive response to his disappearance suggested he held some special significance within the tribe. Perhaps he was the son of a chief or medicine man, or maybe he had some other important role that Jack didn't understand. Looking down at the boy beside him, Jack made a decision that would define not only his own fate, but potentially the future relationship between two peoples who had known far too much conflict. He would not hand Ayana over like a piece of property to be claimed. Instead, he would treat this as a diplomatic situation, one that required respect, patience, and careful communication. "Well, son," Jack said quietly to Ayana, "looks like your people have come for you. That's quite a welcoming committee they've brought." Ayana looked up at Jack with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. In his broken English, he said, "They angry, very angry." Jack nodded, understanding more than the boy's limited words conveyed. "I reckon they are, but we'll work this out, you and me. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing, but it's still right." The standoff continued through the morning, with neither side making any aggressive moves. Jack went about his normal ranch routine, demonstrating to the watching warriors that he had no hostile intentions and that Ayana was being treated well. The boy stayed close to Jack, helping with small tasks and serving as a living testament to the cowboy's good intentions. Around midday, Jack noticed movement among the Apache ranks. A small group of riders began making their way down from the main force toward his ranch. Leading them was a man whose bearing and regalia immediately marked him as a person of great importance within the tribe. Even at a distance, Jack could see the ornate decorations on his clothing and weapons, the eagle feathers in his hair, and the deference shown to him by the other warriors. As the delegation approached, Jack made his own preparations. He checked that his weapons were visible, but not threatening, arranged himself in a position that showed respect, but not submission, and mentally rehearsed the few words of Spanish and Apache he knew. This would be the most important conversation of his life, and possibly the last if things went badly. Ayana suddenly gripped Jack's arm with surprising strength. Looking up at the cowboy with urgent eyes, he said, "Father, great chief father." The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. Ayana wasn't just any Apache child. He was the son of what appeared to be a major chief, possibly even the overall leader of this particular Apache band. That explained the massive response to his disappearance and the high stakes of the current situation. "Your father," Jack repeated, understanding flooding through him. "He's come for you." The approaching delegation consisted of 5 riders, led by the imposing figure who was apparently Ayana's father. The chief was a man in his 40s, tall and powerfully built, with features that showed both strength and intelligence. His dark eyes missed nothing as he surveyed Jack's ranch, taking in every detail that might be relevant to his son's situation. Beside the chief rode an elderly man, whose white hair and deeply lined face spoke of great age and wisdom. Jack guessed this might be a medicine man or tribal elder, someone whose counsel would be valued in such a delicate situation. The other 3 warriors were younger but clearly experienced fighters, their weapons and bearing marking them as elite members of the chief's personal guard. The delegation stopped about 20 yards from where Jack and Ayana stood, maintaining a distance that allowed for conversation while keeping options open for rapid movement if the situation deteriorated. The chief's eyes immediately found his son, and Jack saw a flash of relief cross his stern features before his expression returned to neutral. For several long moments, no one spoke. The silence stretched between the 2 groups like a taut rope, filled with unspoken questions and potential consequences. Jack knew that his next words and actions would determine not only his own fate, but possibly the future relationship between his neighbors and the Apache people. Finally, the chief spoke, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. Though he spoke in Apache, his tone and gestures made his meaning clear. He was asking about his son's condition and treatment. Jack responded in his limited Spanish, hoping that the chief might understand some of the words. "El niño está bien, safe, no hurt." He gestured to Ayana, then to himself, trying to convey that he had helped rather than harmed the boy. The elderly man beside the chief spoke rapidly in Apache, apparently translating or providing counsel. Jack caught a few words that sounded familiar: agua, water, and coma, eat, suggesting that Ayana might have told them about Jack's first words to him. Suddenly, Ayana stepped forward and began speaking rapidly in Apache, his young voice carrying clearly in the desert air. Jack couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the emotion in the boy's voice: gratitude, respect, and what sounded like a passionate defense of the cowboy who had saved his life. The chief listened intently to his son's words, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Ayana finished speaking, the man's dark eyes fixed on Jack with an intensity that seemed to bore straight through to his soul. Jack met that gaze steadily, knowing that any sign of weakness or deception would be immediately detected. "How you saved my son's life," the chief said in careful but clear English, surprising Jack with his command of the language. "Any decent man would have done the same," Jack replied honestly. "He was dying of thirst out there. Couldn't just leave a child to die, no matter who his people were." The chief studied Jack for several more moments, then dismounted from his horse. This action caused a ripple of tension among the warriors positioned around the ranch, but Jack remained still, understanding that this was a significant gesture of trust. Approaching slowly, the chief stopped directly in front of Jack. Up close, his presence was even more impressive. This was clearly a man accustomed to command, someone whose word was law among his people. Yet Jack also sensed a father's gratitude beneath the stern exterior. "I am Chief Nalnish," the man said formally. "This is my son, Ayana, whose life you have preserved." "Jack Sullivan," Jack replied, extending his hand in the white man's gesture of greeting. After a moment's hesitation, Chief Nalnish clasped it firmly. "My son tells me you gave him water and food when he was dying," the chief continued. "He says you treated him with kindness and respect, as you would treat your own child." Jack glanced down at Ayana, who was watching the exchange with obvious hope. "He's a good boy, brave and smart. You should be proud of him." Something flickered in the chief's eyes at these words, perhaps surprised that a white rancher would speak so positively about an Apache child, or maybe simple parental pride at hearing his son praised. "How did he come to be alone in the desert?" Jack asked carefully. "If you don't mind me asking." Chief Nalnish's expression darkened slightly. "There was a storm 3 days ago. Strong winds, much dust. Our traveling party became separated in the confusion. When the storm passed, my son was missing. We have been searching since then." Jack nodded, understanding. Desert storms could be incredibly disorienting, reducing visibility to mere feet and creating enough noise to drown out voices calling for help. It was easy to see how a child could become lost in such conditions. "Well, he's safe now," Jack said simply, "and he's welcome to stay until you're ready to take him home." This offer seemed to surprise Chief Nalnish. In his experience, white settlers were generally eager to rid themselves of Apache presence as quickly as possible. The idea that this rancher would voluntarily extend hospitality was clearly unexpected. "You would trust us to remain near your home?" the chief asked. Jack gestured toward the hundreds of warriors positioned around his ranch. "Seems to me you could take anything you wanted, regardless of what I trust. The fact that you haven't tells me something about your character." A slight smile crossed the chief's features, the first real expression Jack had seen from him. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Jack Sullivan." "Probably a bit of both," Jack admitted with a grin. "Most folks who end up out here are." The tension in the air began to dissipate, as both men recognized they had found common ground. Chief Nalnish turned and spoke rapidly to the elderly man who had remained mounted nearby. The elder nodded and rode back toward the main force of warriors, apparently carrying instructions. "I have told my people that we will make camp here tonight," the chief explained. "Tomorrow, when my son has fully recovered, we will return to our lands." Jack felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at this news. Relief that the immediate crisis seemed to have passed, but apprehension about hosting what amounted to a small army on his property, even friendly ones. "You're welcome to water from my spring," Jack offered, "and I've got enough food to contribute something to your evening meal." Chief Nalnish studied Jack's face again, as if trying to understand what motivated such generosity. "Why do you do this? Your people and mine have not always been friends." Jack considered the question carefully before answering. "Because right now, in this moment, we're not your people and my people. We're just parents and neighbors trying to do right by a child who needed help. Maybe if we had more moments like this, there'd be less trouble between us." The wisdom in Jack's words seemed to resonate with the Apache chief. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder and spoke to him quietly in their native language. Ayana nodded and replied, then turned to Jack. "Father says thank you," the boy said in his careful English. "Says you are good man, good heart." Jack felt a warmth spread through his chest at these words. Praise from a child was always meaningful, but praise from an Apache chief carried weight that he was only beginning to understand. As the afternoon progressed, Jack watched in fascination as the Apache established their temporary camp. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, setting up shelters, organizing supplies, and caring for their horses, with a skill that spoke of generations of nomadic living. It was like watching a small city appear from nothing in the space of a few hours. Chief Nalnish accepted Jack's invitation to share the evening meal, bringing with him several of his senior warriors and the elderly medicine man. The conversation was halting at first, limited by language barriers and cultural differences, but gradually became more natural as both sides recognized their shared humanity. Jack learned that the Apache band was returning from a successful hunting expedition in the mountains to the north. They had been following traditional migration routes used by their people for countless generations, living off the land and maintaining the old ways despite increasing pressure from white settlement. In return, Jack shared something of his own story, how he had come west after the Civil War, seeking a new life far from the battlefields and memories that haunted the eastern states. He spoke of his love for the harsh beauty of the desert, his respect for the land and its original inhabitants, and his hope that different peoples might learn to coexist in this vast territory. Ayana served as an informal translator when the conversation moved beyond the chief's English vocabulary. Clearly enjoying his important role in facilitating understanding between the two groups, Jack was impressed by the boy's intelligence and adaptability, qualities that would serve him well as he grew to manhood in a rapidly changing world. As darkness fell over the desert, the Apache camp came alive with the soft sounds of evening activities. Cooking fires cast dancing shadows on tent walls, and the quiet conversations of warriors blended with the eternal sounds of the desert night. It was a peaceful scene that stood in sharp contrast to the potential for violence that had existed just hours before. Jack found himself sitting by his own fire with Chief Nalnish and the medicine man, whose name he learned was Yudhisthira. Despite their different languages and cultures, the three men found common ground in their shared experience of desert life and their mutual respect for the land that sustained them. "Your son is remarkable," Jack told the chief as they watched Ayana playing with Scout near the edge of the firelight. "He's been through a terrible ordeal, but he's handled it with more courage than most grown men would show." Chief Nalnish nodded with obvious pride. "He is being trained to lead our people someday. This experience, though frightening, will make him stronger and wiser." Jack understood the implications of this statement. Ayana wasn't just the chief's son. He was likely being groomed as the next leader of the tribe. The boy's survival and safe return carried significance far beyond family bonds. "Will you tell me about your people?" Jack asked carefully. "I've lived near Apache lands for years, but I realize I know very little about your ways." The request seemed to surprise Chief Nalnish, but he recognized the genuine curiosity in Jack's voice. Over the next hour, he shared stories of Apache history, traditions, and beliefs. He spoke of their connection to the land, their complex social structures, and their struggles to maintain their way of life in the face of encroaching change. Jack listened intently, fascinated by the depth and sophistication of Apache culture. He had always known they were skilled warriors and desert survivors, but he was learning that they were also philosophers, artists, and storytellers with a rich intellectual tradition. In return, Jack shared his own perspectives on frontier life, the challenges of ranching in harsh conditions, and his observations about the changes sweeping across the American West. The conversation revealed that both men were thoughtful individuals grappling with similar questions about progress, tradition, and the future. As the evening wound down, Chief Nalnish made an unexpected proposal. "You have shown great kindness to my family. In return, I offer you something valuable, knowledge of this land that your people do not possess." Jack looked up with interest, unsure what the chief meant. "There are places in this desert that hold water even in the driest seasons," Nalnish continued. "Hidden springs, ancient wells, caves where rain collects. This knowledge could save your life someday, and the lives of other travelers who pass this way." The offer was incredibly generous. Water sources were the most closely guarded secrets of desert peoples, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death for anyone caught in the wilderness without adequate supplies. "I would be honored to learn such things," Jack replied sincerely, "and I give you my word that I would use such knowledge responsibly." Chief Nalnish nodded, satisfied with Jack's response. "Tomorrow, before we leave, I will show you the 3 nearest hidden springs. Teach your neighbors so that no child, Apache or white, need die of thirst in this desert." The gesture was clearly intended as more than just practical information. It was a symbol of trust, a bridge between two cultures that had known far too much conflict. Jack understood the significance and felt humbled by the chief's faith in his character. As the fire burned down to glowing embers, the conversation turned to more personal topics. Chief Nalnish spoke of his hopes for his son's future, his concerns about the changing world, and his desire to preserve the best of Apache traditions while adapting to new realities. Jack shared his own thoughts about the challenges facing all frontier peoples, the need to balance progress with respect for the land, the importance of building relationships based on mutual understanding rather than fear, and his belief that different cultures could learn from each other if given the chance. The evening ended with a formal ceremony that Yudhisthira, the medicine man, conducted to honor the bond that had been formed between Jack and the Apache band. Though Jack didn't understand all the rituals involved, he participated respectfully, recognizing the spiritual significance of the moment. As he prepared for sleep that night, Jack reflected on the extraordinary events of the past day. What had begun as a simple act of human kindness, giving water to a thirsty child, had evolved into something much larger and more meaningful. He had gained not just the friendship of an Apache chief, but a new understanding of the complex relationships that shaped life on the frontier. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of another scorching day ahead. Jack rose early and began preparing breakfast for his guests, a gesture that was noted with approval by the Apache warriors who were also beginning their morning routines. Chief Nalnish appeared shortly after sunrise, accompanied by Ayana and 2 senior warriors. The boy looked fully recovered from his ordeal, his eyes bright and his movements showing no trace of the weakness that had marked his arrival at the ranch. "My son wishes to thank you personally before we leave," the chief said. Placing a hand on Ayana's shoulder, the boy stepped forward and spoke carefully in English, clearly having practiced his words. "Jack Sullivan, you saved my life. Give water, give food, give safe place. Ayana never forget. Apache people never forget." The simple sincerity of the child's words moved Jack more than any elaborate speech could have. He knelt down to Ayana's level and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You take care of yourself, son," Jack said softly. "Grow up strong and wise like your father. And remember, there are good people in this world of all colors and tribes. Look for them and you'll find them." Ayana nodded solemnly, then surprised Jack by stepping forward and embracing him briefly. It was a gesture that spoke across all cultural boundaries, the simple affection of a child for someone who had shown him kindness. After breakfast, Chief Nalnish fulfilled his promise to show Jack the hidden water sources. They rode to 3 different locations within a few miles of the ranch, each one carefully concealed, but holding precious water that could sustain life in emergency situations. At each spring, the chief explained not just the location, but the signs that indicated water's presence, subtle changes in vegetation, rock formations that trapped moisture, and animal trails that led to hidden sources. It was knowledge accumulated over centuries of desert survival, now being shared with a white rancher who had earned it through simple human decency. "Remember," Chief Nalnish said as they concluded their tour, "water is life in this land. Those who control it have great power, but also great responsibility. Use this knowledge wisely." Jack nodded, understanding that he was being entrusted with something far more valuable than gold or silver. In the desert, water truly was life, and the ability to find it could mean survival for countless future travelers. As they returned to the ranch, Jack noticed that the Apache warriors were preparing to break camp. The efficient organization that had characterized their arrival was equally evident in their departure preparations. Within hours, all traces of their presence would be erased, leaving only the memory of their brief stay. Chief Nalnish extended his hand to Jack one final time. "You have shown my people that not all white men are our enemies. This is a gift of great value, one that may benefit both our peoples in times to come. And you've shown me that Apache people are far more than the stories I've heard," Jack replied. "You're parents and leaders and teachers, just like people everywhere. Maybe if more folks on both sides understood that, we could find better ways to share this land." The chief smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his stern features. "Perhaps you are right, Jack Sullivan. Perhaps there is hope for understanding between our peoples." As the Apache band prepared to leave, many of the warriors approached Jack individually to offer their own thanks and farewells. It was clear that word of his treatment of Ayana had spread throughout the group, earning him respect that extended far beyond his relationship with the chief. The procession that departed Jack's ranch was as impressive as the one that had arrived. 300 Apache warriors moved across the desert landscape with fluid grace, their horses stepping carefully through the rocky terrain while their riders maintained perfect formation. It was a sight that few white men had ever witnessed and lived to describe. Ayana rode beside his father at the head of the column, but he turned frequently to wave at Jack, who stood watching from his front porch. The boy's face showed excitement about rejoining his people, but also genuine sadness at leaving his unexpected friend behind. As the last riders disappeared over the ridge that marked the boundary of Jack's property, a profound silence settled over the ranch. Scout, who had watched the entire departure with alert interest, finally relaxed and came to sit beside his master. Jack remained on his porch for a long time, processing everything that had happened. In the space of less than 48 hours, his quiet, ranching life had been transformed by encounters that challenged everything he thought he knew about Apache people and frontier relationships. The practical benefits of his experience were significant. He now knew the locations of 3 reliable water sources that could prove invaluable in emergency situations. More importantly, he had gained insights into Apache culture and values that few of his white neighbors possessed. But the greatest change was in his understanding of what was possible between different peoples. The conflict and mistrust that characterized most interactions between settlers and Native Americans weren't inevitable. They were the result of fear, ignorance, and missed opportunities for communication. Jack's experience with Chief Nalnish and Ayana proved that respect, kindness, and genuine human connection could bridge even the deepest cultural divides. It was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life, influencing his interactions with all the diverse peoples who called the American frontier home. In the days that followed, Jack found himself thinking often about his Apache visitors. He wondered how Ayana was adjusting to life back with his tribe, whether the boy would remember their time together as he grew to manhood, and what kind of leader he might become when his time came to guide his people. The knowledge Chief Nalnish had shared about water sources proved valuable sooner than expected. Just 2 weeks after the Apache visit, Jack encountered a family of Mexican travelers whose wagon had broken down during their journey north. Using his newfound knowledge, he was able to guide them to one of the hidden springs, providing the water they needed to complete their journey safely. Word of Jack's actions began to spread throughout the territory. The story of the cowboy who had saved an Apache chief's son, hosted a war party for dinner, and gained valuable survival knowledge in return, became legend in saloons and trading posts across the region. Some people regarded Jack's actions with suspicion, viewing any positive interaction with Apache people as potential collaboration with the enemy. But others saw his experience as proof that peaceful coexistence was possible, and they began to reconsider their own assumptions about Native American peoples. Jack's ranch became an unofficial stopping point for travelers of all backgrounds. Mexican traders, Apache hunting parties, white settlers, and mixed groups of various ethnicities all found welcome at his remote outpost. His reputation for fairness and hospitality transcended cultural boundaries, making his property neutral ground in a region often divided by racial and tribal conflicts. The changes in Jack's life weren't limited to his interactions with others. His experience with Ayana had awakened a paternal instinct he hadn't known he possessed. The quiet cowboy who had been content with solitary ranch life found himself considering the possibility of starting a family of his own. When a schoolteacher named Sarah arrived in the nearest town the following spring, Jack found himself making more frequent trips for supplies than were strictly necessary. Sarah was an educated woman from the East who had come west to bring learning to frontier children, and her intelligence and independence impressed Jack greatly. Their courtship was conducted with the respectful formality appropriate to the time and place, but it was clear that both had found something special in the other. Sarah was particularly intrigued by Jack's reputation for fair dealing with all peoples, seeing in him a kindred spirit who valued justice and human dignity above tribal loyalties. When they married the following year, their wedding was attended by an unusually diverse group of guests: Mexican ranchers, Apache traders, white settlers, and mixed families all came to celebrate the union of two people who had become symbols of tolerance and cooperation in their community. Chief Nalnish himself appeared at the ceremony, accompanied by a small honor guard that included Ayana, now a confident 10-year-old who served as an interpreter between the Apache guests and their white hosts. The chief's presence was a powerful statement about the bonds that had been forged through simple human kindness. As Jack and Sarah began their married life together, they established their ranch as more than just a cattle operation. It became a model for the kind of multicultural cooperation that was possible on the frontier, when people approached each other with open minds and generous hearts. Sarah started a small school that welcomed children from all backgrounds, teaching them not just reading and arithmetic, but also the importance of understanding and respecting different cultures. Apache children learned alongside Mexican and white students, breaking down barriers through shared education. Jack's cattle business prospered as well, benefiting from his reputation for honest dealing and his knowledge of desert survival techniques. Traders from various tribes brought him business, knowing they would receive fair prices and courteous treatment regardless of their background. The ranch also served as an informal diplomatic center where disputes between different groups could be resolved through discussion rather than violence. Jack's neutral status and proven fairness made him a trusted mediator when conflicts arose over water rights, grazing lands, or trade agreements. Years passed, and the story of the cowboy who had saved an Apache chief's son became part of the folklore of the American Southwest. But for Jack, it remained a deeply personal memory that continued to shape his worldview and guide his actions. Ayanna grew to manhood and eventually became a respected leader among his people, just as his father had hoped. He never forgot the lessons learned during his brief stay at Jack's ranch, and he worked throughout his life to build bridges between Apache communities and their neighbors of all backgrounds. The two men maintained contact over the years, through intermediaries and occasional meetings at neutral gathering places. Their friendship became a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear, cooperation over conflict. Jack and Sarah raised 3 children of their own on the ranch, teaching them the values of tolerance, courage, and compassion that had guided their parents' lives. Each child grew up speaking multiple languages and understanding the customs of various cultures, preparing them to be leaders in an increasingly diverse frontier society. The ranch that had begun as a simple cattle operation evolved into something much more significant, a place where different peoples could meet on equal terms, where children could learn that diversity was a strength rather than a threat, and where the future of the American West was being shaped through daily acts of kindness and understanding. The water sources that Chief Nalnish had revealed to Jack saved countless lives over the years. Travelers of all backgrounds benefited from this knowledge, and many spread the information further, creating a network of life-saving resources that spanned the desert Southwest. More importantly, the principles demonstrated in that first encounter between a thirsty Apache child and a compassionate cowboy continued to resonate through generations. The simple act of offering water to someone in need, regardless of their background, became a model for how people could treat each other in a complex and often divided world. As Jack grew older, he often reflected on that pivotal day when he had discovered Ayanna dying of thirst in the desert. He realized that in choosing to help a child in need, he had done more than save a single life. He had opened a door to understanding that enriched his own life immeasurably and contributed to a more peaceful frontier. The legacy of that moment lived on in the children educated at the ranch school, the disputes resolved through peaceful negotiation, the lives saved by shared knowledge of water sources, and the countless small acts of cross-cultural kindness that rippled outward from that desert oasis. The American West was built by people of many backgrounds working together. Despite the conflicts and misunderstandings that often dominated historical accounts, Jack's story was one of many that demonstrated the potential for cooperation and mutual respect among diverse peoples, proving that the human capacity for compassion could transcend any barrier of race, culture, or tradition. In the end, the words Jack had spoken to a dying Apache child, "Drink water and eat something," became more than emergency first aid. They became a metaphor for the nourishment that different cultures could provide each other when fear gave way to friendship and conflict was replaced by community.